Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Katie Poser, and I will be the librarian hosting on the back end of our seminar today. A few logistics to get us started. As an attendee, you are muted, so please place all your questions in the question panel. This is going to be a short 30-minute seminar, so if you do want to engage with us afterwards, we will stay on a little bit longer after those 30 minutes, but we want to make sure we keep this short and snappy. We are recording this today, so if you do need to step away or if you would like to revisit this, it'll be up on the library's YouTube channel. And finally, I just want to say if there's any technical issues, such as you can't see us, you can't hear us, please log off and log back on. That solves most issues. Also, you can check your audio settings that might be connected to a Bluetooth or some other speaker system. That solves a lot of those issues. Now, I want to say welcome to Persistent Identifier Week. We are very excited to have you here. My colleague, Jennifer Fagan-Fry, who is the NOAA Institutional Repository Manager, is going to be talking about Digital Object Identifiers today, or DOIs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jen.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and for PID Week. A couple housekeeping things real quick. As Katie mentioned, this is a short presentation, so I'm going to go through a lot of stuff, but there should be time for questions. We also have previously sent out a questionnaire of a Google form where folks can put in questions. Please feel free to continue to use that form. I think Katie has the link and she'll drop it in the chat for everyone. I was going to close that prior to this webinar, but you know what, I'm going to keep it open throughout the rest of the week, just so as people get other questions, as these emails continue to come out during the week, folks can follow up with us, and we will follow up with everyone with those questions. So with that, I'm going to dive into DOIs, Digital Object Identifiers. What are they? They are a persistent identifier or handle that is used to identify objects, specifically objects. They are actionable, interoperable, and enduring. So the most common things that they're used to identify are what we often deem work products. So journal articles, research reports, data sets, official publications. These are resolvable, which means it's tied. DOI is not only just an identifier itself, but it's tied to metadata in a URL, which that's going to point to the item. So it sort of serves as a way to locate something. It's a location device. So there's two things I think it's important for folks to know about the structure of a DOI. It's sort of made up of two entities. The prefix, or sometimes I'll call it a shoulder, and that indicates the registrant. So to back up just for a second, DOIs are minted through registrants, and we'll talk about those in a second, but this prefix indicates who the registrant is, who the entity is that is registering this DOI on your behalf. So this particular DOI is a NOAA publications DOI. The data prefix is going to differ from this. So I don't know what that is right off the top of my head. I think I have an example later on, but anytime you see this 10.25923, that is a NOAA publication and a NOAA DOI that the NOAA Central Library has minted. The second part is the suffix. This is a generic alphanumeric string. It's auto-generated that identifies the specific object. So every NOAA publication DOI is going to have that same prefix, but the suffix is what's going to indicate what the item is, the uniqueness. So there's two ways you can express a DOI. There's just the number, as you can see in the top part, and there's also a DOI URL. When you are citing, when you are using a DOI, it is preferred to use the URL because that's the point of a DOI, right? To locate, link you to whatever it is that you're trying to find. So using the DOI URL is the preferred method. Does that mean you can't just drop in a DOI number? No, but it's not preferred. Per DataCite's best practices and throughout, the citation librarian and publishing community, using a full URL is preferred. So let's demystify DOIs a little bit. I know sometimes people have a lot of misconceptions about what a DOI is and what it is not and how they function. So let's demystify the force just a little bit here. So DOI require registration and there's metadata behind those. So as I mentioned just a little bit ago, registration agents. These are entities, Crossref and DataCite are the two most prominent and the ones used mostly in the United States are registration agencies that are established through the International DOI Foundation, IDF. So when you go to doi.org, that's the IDF. We at NOAA use DataCite for both our publications and for our data sets. Within DataCite, what we do is we quote unquote mint, we use that term a lot, mint or assign the DOI. And what that means is we are assigning and linking specific metadata that fits with that DOI, with that object that we are identifying. So here I'm just focusing on publications because that is what I do, is DOIs for publications. But here are all the required metadata elements that we put in for every NOAA publication that we mint a DOI for. So obviously the document title, author information. We will list all authors and their ORCIDs if available. If you provide us your ORCID, we're going to put it in your not only the IR metadata, but also the DataCite metadata. The publishing entity. So if I were to publish something like a tech memo, the publishing entity would be the NOAA Central and Regional Libraries. That is what we're putting in there, along with that entity's associated organizational identifier. For example, their ROR, their Research Organization Registry Number, which RORs, I believe, are tomorrow. We're going to talk more about RORs in our email tomorrow. We also indicate the type of resource. For publications, we indicate this as text. The reason why that's important is because within DataCite and Crossref, you can mint a DOI for multiple different types of resources. So obviously NOAA does dataset DOIs, publication DOIs, but other agencies, other entities do software DOIs, DOIs for code. So that's why that in particular information is important. Within the metadata, we also include copyright information. So when it comes to NOAA publications, because we are a government entity, everything is in the public domain. So everything is listed as a CC0 license, which is a Creative Commons 0 license, meaning that it is public domain, completely publicly accessible, citable, whole 9 yards. And then the most important thing is URL for the resource. So where is the permanent home of that resource? That URL requires maintenance. So say your resource moves from one server to another server, we need to go in and change that DOI. We need to go in and update that URL information. And then finally, we have series information that we put in there. So for your tech memos, your tech reports, administrative reports, whatever it may be, we put that information in there. So what a DOI is not. I want to be really clear about this because people have a lot of misconceptions about what DOIs sort of do and how they function. And regularly, I feel much like Han Solo, and I say that is not how a DOI works. It doesn't work in those fashions. So DOIs are not just a placeholder. It's not just something you get, it holds a place, and then your document replaces it or something like that. It is a tangible item. It is a publication, a data set, a software product. It is an actual thing must be associated with that DOI. You cannot transfer DOIs. We can't mint a DOI for one publication and then have you say, you know what, I'd rather that DOI be on this publication. Nope, we cannot change them. We cannot reassign them. If you want to withdraw a document, that DOI is still attached to it. There's things we can do to deal with that, to redirect that. We can do things called tombstoning, but if we withdraw a publication, that DOI is still assigned to that publication, and we have to make those changes in that backend metadata and to the URL. If you edit something that has a DOI or create a new version, we can't just move the DOI from the previous version to the new version. New versions of items get a new DOI. We have some versioning, I don't want to say policy, we have some versioning practices, best practices that we use, and we're always happy to talk with folks about those if we need to version out a document. And a DOI isn't just a URL. So as we just went over, there's a ton of underlying metadata that requires a lot of maintenance. So, it's not just a random URL. If that item disappears, the DOI still has to be maintained. So we still have to update that information, the backend metadata, that URL. It's not just a random URL. Sorry, I'm going to go back to this for a second. I have a saying that I say in the library all the time. The DOI is a promise. It's a promise to the user. A DOI is intended to be a persistent identifier. So when someone clicks on that DOI URL, we as the library, as an agency, as NOAA, are promising them that they're always going to be able to find that document. If they click on that DOI and it resolves to nothing, we've broken that promise and we've broken that user's trust. And now they're frustrated because they can't find what they thought they were going to be able to find. So how do you obtain a DOI? For publications, we have recently changed our policy. All NOAA publications are automatically assigned a DOI upon once you submit something and it's accepted to the repository, we will automatically assign a DOI to that document. You can request a DOI prior to submission to the IR, but we ask that you only do that if your intent is to embed the DOI on the document. So you're going to take that DOI URL and put it right on the cover page of your document. And I have an example of that in a second. If you're not planning on doing that, don't worry, you're going to get a DOI anyway. So no need to request one ahead of time, only if you plan on embedding that DOI into your document. For data, data DOIs are minted through NCEI. They are minted for archived data sets. So here I've linked the submission information for NCEI. I don't want to give any wrong information there, so I will defer to the folks at NCEI. If you have specific data questions, I'm happy to pass them on. There are a few that I may be able to answer to some extent, but data archiving is not my specialty. But we can get you some information about the requirements for obtaining a data DOI for items that are archived with NCEI. Per the NOAA Data and Publication Citation Procedural Directive, which this is sort of what we deem as NOAA's DOI policy, which again is linked here, and Katie can drop that into the link to that in the chat as well. To obtain a data DOI, your data must be archived within NCEI. If it's not eligible at this time for a NOAA DOI. There are a couple other options for you possibly. If folks have questions about that, I can try to answer some of those once we're done here. In that DOI, in that procedural directive, it does talk about how to go about getting a DOI for publications, with the caveat of it is a bit old. It was revised, I believe, at the end of 2021, if I recall, possibly early last year. So our new policy of automatically assigning a DOI is not reflected in that. It is currently being revised though. So I do want to put out a warning here. Again, this goes back to a DOI as a promise to the user. If you request a DOI prior to submitting to the repository and then you don't send us that publication, your DOI will not work. We have to have the document in order to complete the metadata and put the URL in to point to that item in the repository. So if you request a DOI, you don't send me the publication, your DOI will be non-functional. So just so you know, that DOI will be a broken link. You have broken the promise to the users and the researchers, and it's completely sort of pointless. So if you request a DOI, send me the publication. So where do you find DOIs on publications? So here's some screen grabs from the repository. If you embed it in the document, here's how NESDIS has been embedding their DOIs. They're just putting the DOI number, which is okay. That's permitted. Again, we do say using the full URL is sometimes better. However, I do know that NESDIS links this text. So when you hover over it, you can click on it and use the URL pops up that way. We also include it in the metadata in the repository. So you can see we also have a separate DOI field there. When we are citing things, DOI, the full URL for the DOI should always be used. So in citations, for example, which is the top box, or even within your data availability statements, most publishers nowadays are asking you to have a DOI for your data upon publication. This goes to the OSTP memo, which I won't get into here because that's a whole different webinar series and an informational week. But DOIs for data need to be available upon publication so that you can have your data availability statement in your publication. So quickly, and then I'll open it up for some questions. A few things that we have going on the rest of the week for PID week. Tomorrow we're having our PID-a-thon. So this is an in-person event for folks in Silver Spring. We are holding it in the library on the second floor. You can come and see me in person and Katie in person. Like, we are real live people, not just talking heads on screens anymore. We are real human beings. So come and visit us. We will have cookies. But we are also there to help you with DOI questions, getting a DOI, understanding DOIs in more depth. ORCIDs, we can help you set up your ORCID. We can talk about organizational identifiers. We can talk about any types of identifiers. At the same time, we know not everybody is in Silver Spring. We are also holding a virtual session, and you can see Sarah Davis, our bibliometrics librarian, or Chris Stevenson, who works with me on the repository and does a lot of our work with ORCID virtually. So we have that link there, and Katie will bring that or put that in the chat as well. And we'll make that available. And those links are also available in the emails. On Thursday, we are having another webinar. This one will be about ORCID. Come and learn how wonderful ORCID is. Even though I liken it to the dark side, it is very powerful, much like the dark side. I did want to call out the NOAA IR submission form. That is where you can go to request a publication DOI if you plan on embedding it, but also that's just how you submit to us. We've made a few changes on that form, so please, if you haven't used it in the past month, it is a little bit different, so please be careful. And then also to submit files, to submit data sets, you would need to go to send to NCEI, which I didn't put the link in here, but we can get the link for you too for that submission information for NCEI. So with that, I'm going to stop and open it up for any questions.
Oh, Jen, we have got questions.
Oh my goodness, great.
I hope we can answer some of them too. So in our chat, we've had some help about the NOAA data DOI prefix, and I've put that into the chat. Also confirming that the handbook for NCEI, I believe, or the data governance is still in a draft form and it's out for review. So the handbook will reflect current library practices, though, when that is confirmed.
Yes, that is in review. It should I'm not quite sure what the timeline is for the data management handbook to be published, we'll say, but it should be at some point this year, and it will reflect those new changes because I have worked with those folks on that. Correct.
Awesome. So our first question is a bit of a doozy. So if a satellite data set, so we're talking data sets here, is reprocessed, for example, uses updated correction methods, it seems clear that this would result in needing a new DOI. The original correction method would retain the original DOI. Is that correct?
So that's a great question. And I see Don is online, so I may need to defer to Don on this, just because versioning for things like data sets, especially continuing, could, I don't know how you guys phrase them, but like I liken them to continuing resources. So constantly or regularly updated data sets would probably have a different sort of method for versioning. For publications, yes, in that instance we would, but for data it may be a little bit different. So I might defer to Don. I don't know if we can get Don on to respond live or not,
We
but
possibly
maybe.
could, but Don is indicating, this is Don Collins, everyone, from NCEI, and he is indicating that this is a question better taken offline. So I am going to assume that means it might be a lengthy answer. So we
So what
can,
we'll do is we'll connect folks there. We'll connect Don and whoever had asked that question, and then we can always follow up with everyone else if people have similar questions as well. I would say if you do have a similar question or would like that same answer, if you could let us know on either the survey that goes out after this webinar or through the question form that we've put out through Google Drive, just let us know, and then we can
mhm.
sort of share some of that information amongst the group.
Yes. So we do have a different question. Is
Mhm.
there a way to obtain DOIs for software?
Excellent question. Currently, NOAA does not have a software DOI policy. There are a few things that have been floating around, but nothing definitive. It is something that is in the works. There are discussions. My suggestion for folks at this point in time is there's a couple things you can do with software where you could obtain a DOI. Depending on who you're working with or if you're collaborating with folks at other agencies, I know Department of Energy, DOE, does have a web page where you can deposit and get DOIs for your code and software. I believe it's called DOE code. Um, let me, uh, here, Katie, sorry, let me share this link with Katie so she can share it with everybody. There is a web page where you can go to get information about that. The other option would be to deposit your software or code within GitHub and go through Zenodo to acquire a DOI for that. Um, as NOAA continues to develop its policies on DOIs, especially for data software code, those sorts of things, uh, we'll have more information. We plan to put that information out to folks. Also, some of this may tie into the updated PAR revisions that will be ongoing over the next year or two um, in relation to the OSTP memo. So code, software, those things do fall under, possibly may fall under PAR when they previously did not. So there may be a lot of changes going on, but now in the interim, there is not a NOAA policy, but you could use those other options for obtaining a DOI.
Thanks, Jen. We've got about two more questions and probably enough time to answer them. Uh, Next question is, when submitting a publication to a journal, would the DOI be from that journal or should it be from NOAA, the repository, or our DOI?
Excellent question. So DOIs are minted by the publishing entity, so whoever the publisher is identified as. So if you're publishing a journal article with you submit your manuscript, that publisher, that journal will be the one to mint the DOI. If you are publishing a tech memo, NOAA is the publisher, and so the library would mint that DOI when we publish it through the repository.
Okay, so to clarify, it's the publisher who gives that DOI.
Correct. So if you're submitting an article to a journal in Wiley, Wiley is the publisher and they will be the ones minting the DOI for you.
Great. So our next question is, so if DOIs aren't born until they're in the NOAA repository or receive one from the repository, uh, DOIs aren't exactly practical for data if they're only held in a line office database. So is there a DOI light for more ephemeral or less formal products?
So this is a complicated question, and I'm going to have to hedge it a little bit, which I don't love doing, but we will. So when it comes to data products, if it's not housed in NCEI, if it's not archived with them, currently a DOI is not, it's not eligible for a NOAA DOI. That being said, there are some things in the works where maybe we can folks are working to figure out a way where if a data set is not housed at NCEI, but maybe through just as an example at GFDL per se, and it's housed within their server systems, maybe there's a way that they would be able to do that, but currently there isn't anything right now. When it comes to publications, so like for ephemera and stuff, if it's not something we take in the repository, it's not really eligible for a DOI. So first, I would say contact me and let's take a look at your item and see if it is something that we could include in the repository in order to get it a DOI. And secondly, we could at that point in time look for some additional options, but like without knowing or seeing exactly what you're looking at, I'm not 100% certain. So that's a pretty unsatisfying answer. Um, my I guess the short version of that is let me see what you have and then we can try to figure out a solution for it. So, and with that, I'll say NOAA's current DOI policies and procedures are in a bit of a stage of sort of evolving. Things have moved really fast. There's a lot of things that need DOIs. There's a lot of things that NOAA is sort of looking at and working on, and a lot of this stems from, again, the OSTP memo and also just the abundance of new research products that NOAA has been producing. And I guess on that same vein, Katie, I will make one other caveat about publication DOIs. So we do have a limit on how far back we will assign a DOI. We will assign DOIs on publications back to 2015. Anything prior to that, obviously we will still take into the repository, but it would not be eligible for a DOI. If your document is already in the repository, we probably will not mint a DOI for it at this point in time. A lot of that's just based on lack of resources, really. So just something to keep in mind. Now, if you have a publication like a NOAA tech memo that you never sent to us from 2017 and you want to send it to us now, we will absolutely still mint a DOI for that document. But if you have one from 2013 that you're sending to us, we probably will not be minting a DOI for that. Just again, lack of resources. We do have to pay for these DOIs. So if it's already in the repository, it's there, it has a home, we're going to roll with that. But something to keep in mind. And I do see a comment here in the chat, and this is a really good point, and I'm assuming Don put this in there, which thank you, Don. If your data set already has a DOI through another source, NOAA will not mint another DOI. You won't have a, because it already has a DOI. A DOI is, again, a promise, and if there's two DOIs for one item, that's confusing and leads to problems. So if it already has a DOI, we're not going to mint a DOI for it. Same would go for a publication, right? So like if you publish something in a journal that has a DOI, I'm not going to mint a DOI for it. It already has one. Any other questions, Katie?
No, I don't see any more questions, and we are at 4 o'clock, so this is our short and snappy 30 minutes gone. So we can close now and thank everybody for joining us. Remind them all that we will have a seminar on Thursday for orchids specifically, so I'm just going to put that attendee information in the chat as well. And I hope this was helpful for everybody. We do have a survey at the end. So when you close out of this, a survey is going to pop up and you can let us know what was confusing, what you still need more clarification on, or if you want to just be kept abreast of when these changes occur. because I know Jen was saying some stuff is still in the works. So please put that into the feedback at the end of the seminar here. And we will see you all either tomorrow in the library in person or virtually. If you come in person, we will have cookies just like the dark side does. And we will see you on Thursday, if not for the ORCID seminar. Thank you all, and thank you, Jen.
Thanks, everybody.